There's a version of Everybody Loves Raymond that most people think they know. 9 seasons of a Long Island family driving each other crazy. A husband caught between his wife and his mother. A brother who never quite got his share of the good stuff. Audiences watched it, loved it, and felt like they understood it completely. But the show that played out on camera was only half the story, and the half that stayed hidden was darker, stranger, and far more human than anything the writers put on paper. A star performing through addiction. A beloved cast member working in secret with a terminal diagnosis. Pregnancies concealed from millions of viewers using nothing but clever camera angles and baggy clothing. A salary dispute so serious it shut production down. These weren't rumors or tabloid speculation, they were the real life of a show built entirely on real life, and almost none of it ever made it to air. Ray Romano almost refused to let the show keep its own name. The title, Everybody Loves Raymond, came from a joke made by his real-life brother Richard, a New York City police officer who had developed a very specific kind of frustration with the contrast between his career and his brother's. Richard would go to work and have people shooting at him, while Ray would go to work and people would give him a standing ovation, hand him a trophy, and ask him to sign something on the way out. The sarcasm was clear, and CBS grabbed the phrase as a working title with no real intention of keeping it. Romano himself pushed back once it became clear the network wanted to make it permanent, worried that a title announcing his character as universally beloved would attract exactly the kind of critical backlash that tends to follow anything that sounds like a boast. What changed his mind wasn't a conversation or a persuasive argument. It was the show's success, which made the title feel less like arrogance and more like evidence. By the time Everybody Loves Raymond had collected Emmy Awards and built one of the most loyal audiences in network television history, the name had become a prophecy that nobody had quite intended. Richard Romano's position as the real-life model for Robert Barone created problems that never made it into any episode. Though working as a police officer while his brother's television show turned a fictionalized version of his life into national entertainment, meant showing up to work knowing his colleagues had watched the previous night's broadcast. Certain character traits and storylines that tracked a little too closely to real events became reliable sources of workplace teasing. And one running joke among Richard's fellow officers involved a habit of borrowing things, a detail that apparently landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Romano has talked about his brother's mixed feelings on the matter, the strange position of having your life translated into comedy for millions of people without quite having control over how the translation comes out. The affection behind it was real, and the success of the show was genuinely something to be proud of. But the person on the other side of that creative mirror doesn't always find the reflection flattering. The children on the show went through changes that most viewers never noticed, and those changes started before the series properly began. Romano's real family at the time consisted of a daughter named Alexandra and twin sons named Gregory and Matthew, and the pilot episode named the Barone children Allie, Gregory, and Matthew with barely any distance between fiction and biography. That closeness made Romano uneasy, and the twin boys were renamed Michael and Jeffrey before the show found its rhythm, creating just enough separation to let him write from personal experience without feeling like he was handing the audience a documentary. The actors playing those children also shifted as the series progressed. The original twins, Justin and Drew Ferreira, visibly aged out of their roles, and the solution the production landed on had a quality that felt almost scripted itself. Madeline Sweeten, who played Allie, had real-life younger twin brothers named Sawyer and Sullivan, and they stepped into the roles of Michael and Jeffrey. None of the Sweeten children bore a strong physical resemblance to their television parents, which turned out to be fine, because audiences had already accepted them as family in the way that viewers do when a show earns their trust. Romano's approach to the adult content of the show was something he thought about carefully and talked about openly during production of the second season. What he wanted was a family comedy that kept its center of gravity with the adults rather than the children, one that could explore the specific anxieties and frustrations and private failures of married life without packaging them into lessons or softening them into something easier to digest. He put it plainly enough at the time. He didn't want to get upstaged by toddlers, having already dealt with that at home. Phil Rosenthal, who created the show and remained its driving creative force throughout all 9 seasons, shared that instinct completely, and the writers' room operated on a principle that the material was only worth using if it came from somewhere genuine. Arguments from Rosenthal's own marriage ended up in scripts. A disagreement about something as small and domestic as a can opener became the foundation for an episode. The show's authenticity wasn't performed, it was extracted, carefully and repeatedly, from the actual lives of the people making it. Peter Boyle landed the role of Frank Barone on a day when nothing went right, and that might have been exactly the point. Arriving at Universal Studios for his meeting with Romano and Rosenthal, Boyle brought his entire family along. Ran into trouble getting past security, couldn't find a parking spot, walked into the wrong building, and by the time he reached the room where the meeting was happening, his frustration was written across his face without any acting required. Boyle later said he believed showing up genuinely irritated that afternoon might have been what got him the part, and whether that's true or just a good story, it carries the right kind of logic. Frank Barone's grumpiness never felt performed, and neither did Boyle's that day. 7 consecutive Emmy nominations followed over the course of the show's run, each one a recognition of how much specific, lived-in quality he brought to a character who could easily have been a cartoon but never was. What the cast didn't know, and what most of the crew never found out, was that Boyle received a multiple myeloma diagnosis in 2002 and made a deliberate choice to keep it quiet. He told his immediate family and a small number of people on the production, and one of those people was Doris Roberts, who played Marie Barone and who had become one of his closest friends on set. When Boyle asked whether he should disclose his condition to everyone, Roberts told him no, said he didn't need to be treated as though he were terminally ill, that what he needed was for the writers to keep writing for his character, for life on set to continue as normally as possible. Boyle took that counsel seriously and kept working, kept showing up, kept delivering performances that audiences loved without any awareness of what was happening behind them. The show ended in 2005, and Boyle died in 2006 from complications tied to the cancer and heart disease at 71. The choice he made to protect his own normalcy, and the friendship with Roberts that helped him make it, is one of the quieter stories the show left behind. Brad Garrett spent much of the show's run managing something the audience never saw, and years after Everybody Loves Raymond ended, he described it without softening the details. During the first season especially, Garrett was performing while dealing with alcohol dependency, functioning well enough on the outside that nobody around him had a clear picture of how serious things had gotten. He has called himself a high-functioning alcoholic during that period, someone who kept the professional side of his life intact while the personal side deteriorated in ways that weren't visible to the people he worked with. Before the first season finished, he made the decision to stop drinking, and that decision held. 3 Emmy Awards came over the course of the show's run, recognition for a performance built on an understanding of loneliness and second-place status that Garrett made feel completely natural. Knowing what he was navigating at the time gives those performances a weight that they carry differently in retrospect. Patricia Heaton became pregnant twice during the show's production, and both times the crew pulled off something that required genuine coordination and ingenuity. The pregnancies couldn't be written into the storylines, which meant everyone involved needed to find ways to keep them off screen for months at a time. Loose clothing, strategic prop placement, careful camera angles, and deliberate staging all played their part, and the results were good enough that most viewers watching those episodes had no awareness of what was being concealed right in front of them. Heaton had already had 3 children before the show began, and the logistical challenge of managing 2 additional pregnancies during production speaks to a level of collaboration between the actress and the crew that doesn't get talked about much, but deserved recognition. 2 Emmy wins in 2000 and 2001, and nominations every year from 1999 through 2005 reflected the industry's assessment of what she brought to the role of Debra Barone, a character who balanced exhaustion and intelligence and warmth in ways that felt consistently true. Heaton's political views differed sharply from those of Peter Boyle, and she has spoken about that contrast openly. Her conservative positions and Boyle's liberal ones created disagreements that never escalated into lasting damage, largely because both of them seemed to understand that a friendship built over years of shared work was worth more than winning an argument. Heaton attended Boyle's funeral in 2006 and acknowledged publicly that he had supported her during her own struggles with sobriety. The show also worked in a quiet tribute to her father, Chuck Heaton, who spent more than 50 years as a journalist at the Cleveland Plain Dealer and earned wide respect for his work. In one episode, Debra mentions a colleague of Ray's named Chuck Heaton, a detail that passed unnoticed by nearly everyone watching but carried real meaning for the actress playing the scene. The salary situation that developed as the show's success grew eventually forced a confrontation that the production couldn't avoid. By 2003, Romano had become the highest-paid actor on American television, earning $1.8 million per episode plus residual income from syndication. Garrett, pulling 3 Emmy wins and a central role in the show's ensemble, was taking home $160,000 per episode, a number that looks very different when placed next to Romano's. Garrett walked out. Other cast members joined him. After several weeks of negotiation, the group came back with improved deals, and production resumed without permanent damage to the relationships on set. But the dispute made clear what the success of the show had generated financially, and how unevenly that had been distributed. And the fact that it got resolved without destroying the cast's chemistry says something about the specific kind of trust they had built over years of working together. Each episode of Everybody Loves Raymond moved through the week on a fixed schedule that Rosenthal maintained with real discipline. Monday brought script readings, Tuesday carried rehearsals and revisions. Wednesday brought CBS executives in to review what the cast had developed. Thursday went to camera blocking and technical preparation, and Friday was the live taping. The writing process began in the writer's room with personal stories, arguments from the writers' own marriages, frustrations from their domestic lives, anything that carried enough emotional truth to survive the journey to a finished script. Rosenthal discouraged improvisation on the floor, which distinguished the show's approach from other successful comedies of the same period that relied more heavily on what actors discovered in the moment. The exterior of the Barone home, that immediately familiar house on the screen, was a real property at 135 Margaret Boulevard in Merrick, New York, valued at around $500,000 as of 2018, with the fictional home of Ray's parents positioned directly across the street, a piece of set design built into the actual geography of a real neighborhood. The music gave the show part of its texture and tone without most viewers ever thinking much about where it came from. Terry Trotter and Rick Marotta composed the theme, drawing inspiration from Woody Allen's Manhattan and developing something original through improvisation that fit the show's particular rhythm. The piano-heavy scoring contributed to what critics noticed as a quality of refinement that separated Everybody Loves Raymond from standard network sitcom production, and the choice to use New Yorker-style typography in the credits reinforced that sense of something made with more care than the format usually required. CBS's comedy development team at the time described the show as a traditional sitcom that brought sophistication to the genre, and the deliberate decision to avoid topical cultural references meant the episodes aged slowly, which turned out to matter a great deal once syndication began and new audiences found the show decades after its original run. Maggie Wheeler, recognized by comedy audiences from her work on another hit sitcom of the same era, came very close to playing Debra Barone. She auditioned seriously for the role and was a genuine contender, but CBS ultimately went with Patricia Heaton, while finding a smaller recurring role for Wheeler that she accepted and that audiences responded to warmly. Doris Roberts, who built Marie Barone into one of the most memorable mothers in sitcom history, came to the role with more than 6 decades of professional work already behind her, including 5 Emmy Awards and a Screen Actors Guild Award. Her death in April 2016 at the age of 90 closed a career that had stretched across an extraordinary range of productions, though Marie Barone remained the role most viewers thought of first. The show ended because the people making it decided to stop before the quality did. The writing staff felt they had used up the genuine material available to them, that going further would mean manufacturing conflict rather than finding it, and that the integrity of the work they had built over 9 seasons was worth protecting even at the cost of additional revenue. Rosenthal put it in practical terms, noting that continuing would have required the writers to intentionally pick fights with their spouses just to generate new storylines. 15 Primetime Emmy Awards accumulated over the run, including Outstanding Comedy Series in both 2003 and 2005, and TV Guide placed it at number 60 on its list of the greatest television shows of all time. For Heaton, the ending carried a weight she didn't fully anticipate. During the final week of production, she broke down during rehearsals and lost her voice entirely from crying, which pushed the taping of the final episode back until she recovered enough to film it in front of a live audience. Syndication carried the show forward long after the cast went their separate ways. On December 20th, 1998, WPIX in New York and KTLA in Los Angeles acquired syndication rights through iMark Entertainment, with weekly license fees running between $90,000 and $100,000 plus barter advertising time as part of the agreement. The original fall 2000 launch date got pushed back a full year to avoid competing with other sitcoms entering syndication simultaneously, which reflected how carefully the distribution was being managed. TBS picked up cable rights in early 1999, and after that run, the show moved to TV Land. Warner Brothers International Television handled global distribution, putting the Barone family in front of audiences in the United Kingdom, Australia, India, Canada, and markets well beyond the New York suburb where the story was set. Channel 4 in the UK ran the show as part of its morning programming. The complete series landed on DVD across multiple regions, and before Netflix removed it in September 2016, every episode was available for streaming, continuing to find viewers who had missed the original broadcast entirely. What separated Everybody Loves Raymond from the dozens of family comedies that came and went without leaving much behind was a commitment to drawing its material from real experience rather than sitcom convention. Romano spent 12 years refining his stand-up act before a performance on The Late Show with David Letterman caught the attention of Letterman's production company and set the show's development in motion. The series that came out of that meeting ran for 9 seasons, earned a devoted audience, and left behind a body of work that held up because it trusted its audience to recognize something true. The pregnancies hidden in plain sight, the salary disputes that briefly shut production down, and the cancer diagnosis kept secret from nearly everyone on set The addiction managed quietly through a first season. None of that made it onto the screen, but all of it shaped the people delivering the performances, and that shaped everything the audience actually saw. Everybody Loves Raymond endures because the people who made it were willing to be honest. And the most honest thing about it turns out to be how much was happening that nobody talked about at the time.